Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Eva from Debug Squad again. So in chapter 3, I'll be talking about AST in Babel. 4 key points here. Firstly, commonly used AST nodes. Secondly, corresponding nodes in Babel's AST for syntax encode. Thirdly, AST visualizational tool. And lastly, AST common properties. The first stage of Babel's compilation is to pass the source code into an AST and then convert the AST. Most of the ASTs of JS parser follow the AST standards, which are extended from SpiderMonkey's AST standards. The entire compilation process of Babel revolves around AST. So in this chapter, let's learn about AST. After you get familiar with AST, then you know how the Transpiler and JS engine understands the code, and this will also help you to get a better understanding of JavaScript. So, commonly used AST node. AST is an abstraction of source code. Literals, identifiers, expressions, statements, module syntax, and class syntax can be expressed through AST. So let's take a look at each of them. Literals, it represent values in JavaScript, and these are fixed values, not variables, that you literally provide in your script. For example, let name equals to Eva, and Eva is a string literal. And there are also numeric literals, Boolean literals, regular expression literals, etc. There are lots of literals in the code, and Babel abstracts this part of the content through something literal, and these literals will help you to write cleaner code. So string literals, it can be indicated by single or double quote, and template literals, which are indicated by backtick character. This backtick character is the character before number 1 on your keyboard. Numeric literal indicated by numbers, and regular expression literals indicated by 2 slashes. Boolean literals is by true or false, and no literals indicated by no. Next commonly used AST node would be identifier. Identifier refers to declaration and references names such as variable names, attribute names, parameter names, etc. And we know that identifiers in JS can only contain letters, numbers, or underscore, or $sign, and cannot start with a number. So this is the lexical feature of identifier. And let's take a small test here and ask yourself, how many identifiers are there in the following code? I'll give you 5 seconds on this. Okay, time's up. So let me give you the answer here. Ta-da! There are 8 identifiers in this code. So do you get it right? Okay, let's move on to statement. Statement is a unit that can be executed independently, such as break, continue, debugger, return, if statement, while statement, for statement, declaration statement, expression statement, etc. Every piece of code we write that can be executed independently is a statement. And statements are usually separated by a semicolon at the end or separated by a new line. And the following are some of the common codes that we often write, and each line is a statement. So here is the corresponding AST note as shown here. So break with a semicolon, it's a break statement. Continue with a semicolon, it's a continue statement. Return with semicolon is a return statement, and so on. Bracket, it's a curly bracket, it's a block statement. Try catch is a try statement. For in statement. For loop, it's a for statement. While true or false, it's a while statement. And there are a few more examples here. Do while, switch, and with statement. Statements is the smallest unit of code execution, so it can be said that code is composed of statements. Next would be the declaration. A declaration statement is a special kind of statement that declares a variable, function, class, import, export, etc. in the scope. For example, you can see the corresponding AST note are on the right. So constant age equals to 18, it's variable declaration. Function speak, it's function declaration. Class user, it's class declarations in the AST node. And a few more examples here. Import React from React is an import declaration, as well as export default declaration, export named declaration, and also export all declarations. Declaration statements are used to define variables, and variable declarations are also a fundamental part of coding. Another commonly used AST node would be expression. Expression has a return value after execution, which is different from a statement. Here are some common expressions. Bracket 1, 2, 3, etc. And their corresponding AST node are shown here. So, bracket 1, 2, 3, it's an array expression. A equals to 1, it's an assignment expression. 1 plus 2, it's binary expression. Minus 1, it's unary expressions. And function something, it's a function expression. Also, arrow function expression, class expression, this expression, by expression, super, and identifier. So, if you pay attention to this diagram, you may ask why identifier and super are both expressions. In fact, some nodes may be of multiple types. Identifier and super have return values, which conform to the characteristics of expressions. So, they are expressions. We judge whether an AST node is of a certain type depending on whether it conforms to the characteristics of this type. For example, the characteristics of a statement is that it can be executed independently, and an expression is that it has a return value. So some expressions can be executed independently and conforms to the characteristics of statements. So they are also statements, such as assignment expressions, array expressions, etc. But some expressions cannot be executed alone and need to be combined with other types of nodes to form a statement. For example, if an anonymous function expression and an anonymous class expression are executed alone, an error will be shown. It needs to be combined with other parts to form a statement. such as an assignment statement. And when the expression statement is passed into an AST, it will wrapped by an expression statement node, which means that the expression is executed as a statement. So, all in all, expressions are characterized by return values, and some expressions can be executed independently as statements, wrapped by an expression statement. Okay, so now I'll move on to class is another AST node here. Its corresponding AST node looks like this on the right. So the content of the entire class is class body. The property is class property. And the method is class method. Constructor or method is distinguished by the kind property. And you can see that there is an example that I put in on the left side. Okay, so class is the syntax in ES Next. So there is a dedicated AST in Babel to represent it as well. Okay, so that would be all for class. Next will be the modules. ES module is a syntax level module specification, so there are also dedicated AST nodes, and it's separated into import and export. Import has three syntax: name import, default import, and namespace import. An example is given on the right side. So these three syntaxes correspond to the import declaration node, but their specifier property are different, corresponding to import specifier, import default specifier, and import namespace specifier respectively. The yellow box marks the specifier part. You can see that the overall structure is the same, but the specifier part is different. So the structure of the AST of the import in the syntax is import declaration, which contains various import specifiers. And what about export? Export has three syntaxes: name export, default export, and all export. An example is also given on the right side. And these three types of export and their corresponding AST are export name declaration, export default declaration, and export all declarations. Okay, so this will be all for module. Next will be program and directive. Program is a node representing the entire program. It's the body property representing the program body and stores the statement array. There is also the directive property, which stores directive nodes such as use strip, which will be represented by directive nodes. Program is the node that wraps the specific execution statement, and directive is the instruction part of the code. Next will be file and command. The outermost node of Babel's AST is file, which has properties such as program, commands, tokens, etc., which store the program body, commands, tokens, representative. Commands are divided into block commands and inline commands, corresponding to command block and command line nodes on the right. So I have mentioned 6 types of commonly used AST nodes in total. And these are some common AST node types. Babel abstracts different parts of the source code through these nodes. And of course, we don't need to remember what content corresponds to what AST node. We can view it through the web tool astexplorer.net. This tool can show the results after the code is passed, but if you want to see the full AST, you can check it in the AST document in the Babel Puzzle GitHub repo, or directly goes to TypeScript definition of Babel types. And for last part of the chapter, I'll be talking about AST's common properties. So each AST has its own properties, but they also have some common properties, such as type, start and log, leading comments, inner comments, and trailing comments. Lastly, extra. Type refers to the type of the AST node. Start and log. Start and end represents the start and end positions of the source string corresponding to the node, regardless of row and column. The log property is an object with line and column properties that records the starting and ending line and column numbers, respectively. For leading comments, inner comments, and trailing comments, indicates starting, middle, and ending comments, because comments may exist in each AST node and may be recorded at the start, middle, end position through these 3 properties. And lastly, extra. It records some extra information to handle some special cases. For example, if modifies string literal value property only modifies the value itself, while modifying extra raw property can also modify the single and double quotation marks. Okay, so that will be all for the common properties. I'll summarize it for you in the next slide. So in this chapter, we learned that the corresponding node in Babel's AST for syntax in code. Firstly, we have learned identifier, various literals, statements, declaration statements, expressions, and AST nodes such as class, modules, file, program, directive, comments, etc. Secondly, after understanding this node, you know how the code you usually write is represented by AST. And of course, you don't need to remember it. You can just use the web tool astexplorer.net to view it visually. Thirdly, there can be multiple types of AST node. To determine the type of AST node mainly depends on its characteristics. For example, the characteristics of statement is that it can be executed independently, and the characteristics of expression is that it has a return value. So, some expressions that can be executed independently will be wrapped an expression statement. Lastly, different AST nodes have different properties to store their corresponding source content, but all have some common attributes such as type, comment, log, etc. And once you have mastered the AST, you can convert the operation of the code into the operation of AST. So that's all for chapter 3 on AST in Babel. I will see you guys in the next video on API in Babel. If you have any questions, Feel free to comment in the box below, or you can contact us directly at supertripled41@gmail.com. Make sure you click the subscribe button and stay tuned for chapter 4 of Babel. See you there!